The wait is finally over. Apple Silicon has went from myth to existence. And unlike the PS5 or the new Xbox, you can actually purchase one of these new Macs. Apple Silicon is featured in 3 new SKUs from Apple. You've got the Mac Mini, the MacBook Air, and the MacBook Pro. And all 3 are featuring the same M1 chip with the same RAM options. And the only difference is the power that's allotted to the chip and the cooling solution. Greetings nerds, I am Jeff the IT guy, Director of IT. And in this video we're going to be looking at the new M1 MacBook Pro. We're going to see how it compares to the 2020 MacBook Pro with the Intel i5, which I called the best choice for programmers not too long ago. You'll see it popping across the screen. And we're going to see if this new Apple Silicon and the M1 chip is actually, truly pro level. And so, when comparing the previous MacBook Pro to the new one, let's first talk about the construction of the machine, the screen, etc. The screen, it's the same, It's a 2560 by 1600 resolution. It's got 500 nits of brightness, and it's got the same wide color P3 gamut. The keyboard, they're the same, as well as the touch bar, which I'm not a fan of. You heard me rant about it before. And I'm not really a fan of the keyboard either. I prefer the larger keys. It's more akin to the 2012 MacBook Pro. But this one is better than the previous generations. I guess Apple learned from their mistakes. And so I loathe the touch bar and I hate to see it return, but it does have better functionality this time around with Big Sur. And so the new M1 MacBook Pro, it features a better mic system. It's a 3-array mic system, and it has neural ISP for the 720p webcam, which should result in sharper image quality when you're doing video chat. And so this new MacBook Pro, it comes with 2 USB-C Thunderbolt 4 ports, which allow for more bandwidth and can even connect to the Pro XDR display at a full 6K. And with the 2012 Intel version, which we have right here, you have, actually this is the 2012, we have 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports. And so, we do get more ports, but they do have less bandwidth. The M1, which is right here, it is limited to only 16 gigs of RAM, and that's because it's on the chip itself. It's an SoC. While this one here, this Intel one, can support 32 gigs. And the storage options on this one here, it's limited to only 2 terabytes, but the 2020 Intel, this one here, it can handle 4 terabytes. And so you are losing storage options. But, enough about specs and all that stuff. The real reason you're here is you want to talk about performance. And so for performance, I looked at two metrics really to get a good sense of how well the new M1 MacBook Pro runs. I looked at Xcode doing iOS development and Final Cut Pro. And the reason for that is because I figured those are probably the 2 largest applications that someone who would buy this at a pro level would be looking at, would be those 2. I was going to look at Premiere Pro. There's no native apps yet, but we'll talk about that later. And so for the performance, and these I ran for these 2, like I said, Xcode and Final Cut Pro. In Xcode, I downloaded the Flappy Swift from GitHub, and so it's like a Flappy Bird except it's in Swift. And I did a compile test on it, and as well looked to see how long it took for the emulator to run and how smooth it was. And so to compile Flappy Swift on the M1 MacBook Pro and to run it, to compile it, run the emulator, and get to where you can actually control the bird, it took 9 seconds, which is really quick. So let's talk about the 2020 MacBook Pro that I have here, which has 16 gigs of RAM and the i5 in it. So as far as specs go, it seems like it would be beefier, right? Because it does have more RAM and stuff. This one here, it took, for the same test, it took 1 minute and 42 seconds to go from hitting the compile button to where you're actually able to control the bird. That's insane. That is, it literally took 1/10 of the time for the M1 to be able to do that as what it did the Intel i5 that is in this one. When we start looking at Final Cut Pro, one of the things that Apple touted was that you could do 4K video editing on the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro, and just all of these enhancements, all of this performance that you were going to have. I can't record in 4K, I can only do 1080p, but I still think it's going to give us a good indication of how well it performs. And so on the 2020 MacBook Pro with the i5 in it, it took to render and to export or share a 10-minute video that had some lighting done to it, some audio done to it, as well as transitions, effects, etc. It took 5 minutes, or 4 minutes and 59 seconds, I believe is what it was. 4 minutes and 59 seconds. On the M1, same video clip, rendering both of these, like I said, at Apple ProRes 422, doing all of that, it took 1 minute and 47 seconds. And so the M1 took 73% less time, or it's close to 3 times as fast if you want to put it that way. And think about that as a pro, if time is money, which it is, time is money. Same thing for development. I couldn't believe how fast it was for development. If you're doing something 73% faster, that means that you can get work 73% done quicker, which means that you can take on 73% more projects in the same amount of time, which should, I mean, it probably won't equal out to 73% more money, but it will equal out to 73% more work that can be done. And so while running both of these tests, the 2020 MacBook Pro with the i5, it had the fan running at full blast. It sounded like it was going to take off and just leave the atmosphere. It was extremely warm. The M1 MacBook Pro, the fan, I couldn't hear it. It wasn't audible. It was very cold to the touch as far as like being able to touch it. You know, with these unibodies, you can feel the heat when they come off. It didn't, I mean, you couldn't even hear it, and it still stomped the i5, which is really cool. The M1 over here, it can run iPad and iPhone apps. You know, currently they're limited to a select, you know, set of apps, and it's up to the developers if they want to make it available for this. You know, so like you can't get Google apps on here right now. You can't get the Microsoft apps. And I said earlier that Premiere Pro or the Adobe Suite's not here. It's not native on here yet, which is a shame. But, you know, they are working on it and will be available. You can play Among Us on here now. So that's pretty cool. You can play Among Us on your Mac as the iPad app. So that's really cool. I ran the Candy Crush clone, I can't remember what it's called, and it was great to be able to play that on my MacBook Pro. So that was pretty cool to be able to run that iPad app. I looked at several other apps to see what was available that I could download. So like most of my banking apps and things of that nature were available on the M1. There's a whole slew of Apple in their app store. They've got it to what you can run or what's available to run on your new M1 MacBook Pro. Okay, so the bad news though, like I said, there's currently no native apps for Adobe, but they're coming. And if you're an Android dev, you're a little bit out of luck right now. If you're an Android developer, you can't use the Android emulator in Android Studio currently. However, based upon a Reddit post that I've seen from an Android dev or an Android Studio dev who works on the emulator, did say that Android Studio is working on making an emulator to be able to run the Android emulator on the M1 Max native, so and ARM processor. So they are working on that. So it's not available day one. However, it will be coming. I'm hoping just for where I work that we can see it by end of month or end of year. That would be great for me if we could see it within the next month or two. Because I'd like to move on purchasing these for all of my developers. However, I do have Android dev, so I need to have that functionality. So, in conclusion, you know, the new M1 MacBook Pro, it's fantastic. It's a powerhouse for Apple applications. You know, if you're an iOS dev or a Final Cut fanatic, this is the machine for you. I mean, it cuts down so much work. You can do so much on it. So this is a new architecture, and as with everything, whenever you go to a new architecture or something, being an early adopter, you do have issues. So, you know, currently there's the native apps that you need for some of your stuff, like I said, Adobe, Android Studio, they're not available, but they should be coming. Given the popularity of these products for professionals, I would expect these applications to work natively sooner rather than later. That just makes sense to me as a businessman. The battery life on this thing is fantastic. I didn't have it on the battery while I was doing a lot of my stuff. On it, the battery life is great. I've had it, you've been using it all day off the battery, been in several video conferences. The mic array is fantastic. The sound is a lot better coming from the mic. Everyone talked about how clear the mic quality was in all of my meetings today. They talked about how clear and sharper the image was from the webcam. So that is true. That's great for that. So really everything that Apple was touting seems to be true. But there are, like I said, a couple caveats and a couple issues. Whenever you do pick up something like this day one, a couple of apps kept crashing, and that's because they're using the Rosetta emulator to run native apps that was running on your Intel-based machines on this new architecture. So there are a couple issues with that. However, those should be quickly overcome, I hope. And so I want to thank everyone for watching this video. Listen, if you like the video, leave a like. Hit the subscribe button if you want to have more awesome videos pop up on your feed. There's a lot of great videos on my channel already. Go check those out. Leave me a comment. Let me know, if you're a dev and if you're thinking about picking up one of these, or if you're going to stick with, your older MacBook Pros, or if you're just, an IT enthusiast. Let me know what you think about the new M1 Max. I love replying to your comments. I love reading the comments. It's something I try to do is reply and really, have conversation with everyone who replies and stuff like that. And so I want to thank every one of you all for watching this. And I love hearing from you. So stay safe out there and keep it real.